Lesson 4 for July 20 to 26, Mercy and Justice in Psalms and Proverbs. Friday, July 26. From the book Patriarchs and Prophets, page 754, we read, "The Psalms of David pass through the whole range of experience, from the depths of conscious guilt and self-condemnation to the loftiest faith and the most exalted communing with God. His life record declares that sin can bring only shame and woe, but that God's love and mercy can reach to the deepest depths, that faith will lift up the repenting soul to share the adoption of the sons of God. Of all the assurances which his word contains, it is one of the strongest testimonies to the faithfulness, the justice, and the covenant mercy of God." And referring to the wisdom in the book of Proverbs, we read in Education, page 137, "These are principles with which are bound up the well-being of society, of both secular and religious associations. It is these principles that give security to property and life. For all that makes confidence and cooperation possible, the world is indebted to the law of God as given in his word, and as still traced in lines often obscure and well-nigh obliterated in the hearts of men." And that brings us to our 4 discussion questions for this week. 1. In what ways would you consider yourself a leader or in a position of influence? How can you be an agent of justice in that aspect of your life? 2. Think about the culture and social structures of the place where you live. In what way can you work within the existing system to better the lot of those in need? 3. Why are the principles of justice and fairness so important for building a strong society? And 4. While the book of Proverbs is focused on wisdom for living well, what does it tell us about what God is like? And to summarize this week's lesson, Psalms and Proverbs are 2 books particularly tuned to the challenges of living faithfully amid life's common experiences and trials. Both offer insights into God's vision for society and his special concern for the poor and oppressed. The cry of the Psalms and the wisdom of Proverbs are that God does notice and will intervene to protect those too often ignored or exploited. And if that's what God's about, it's what we should be about as well. Inside Story. Our mission story this week is titled Missionary SUV, and it's by Andrew McChesney of Adventist Mission. Parking at home in the U.S. state of Maryland, Joe Marcelino saw a trail of oil winding up the street from his Isuzu Trooper SUV. "Uh-oh," he said to his wife Susan, "things aren't good." Joe, a 33-year-old IT manager at the Seventh-day Adventist World Church headquarters in Silver Spring, Maryland, called a friend for help. The friend, Eric Armour, found oil spewing from the oil filter and warned that engine repairs probably would cost more than $3,000. Joe and Susan, recently married, had exactly $3,000 in the bank, but Joe was reluctant to spend the money on the SUV because the couple had fallen behind in returning tithe. They owed $1,500 for the past 3 months. Susan saw no room for discussion. "We need to give our first fruits," she said. Joe and Susan prayed and decided to return tithe rather than repair the SUV. After the decision, Eric advised Joe to call the filling station that had changed the oil shortly before the spill. The filling station sent a mechanic to Joe's house and, after an inspection, offered to rebuild the engine for free. Joe, however, wasn't sure he trusted the gas station, so he accepted a $3,000 payment instead. Joe asked another friend, Bill Brody, a car mechanic, to rebuild the engine. When the repairs were finished, Joe received the bill for $1,500. To his surprise, the $3,000 from the gas station had been enough to cover repairs and tithe. Bill cautioned Joe as a friend to sell the SUV, saying it could break down at any time. Days later, Wayne Calby, purchasing director at Adventist Church headquarters, asked Joe whether he would be willing to sell the SUV. A missionary in Africa has asked specifically to buy an Isuzu Trooper, he said. Joe immediately shared the SUV's history, but Wayne said he was willing to take the risk. He gave Joe a fair price and shipped the vehicle to Africa. The SUV had about 40,000 miles, that's 64,000 kilometres on it. About 18 months passed and Wayne told Joe, "You remember that SUV? Now it has more than 100,000 miles on it." "Praise the Lord," Joe said. "I didn't think it would last that long." A couple of years later, Wayne announced that it had passed 200,000 miles, then 300,000 miles. Joe was amazed. "It is the Lord who kept it going for this missionary," he said. Joe, now 61, and there's a picture of him with his wife here, said the experience taught him a lesson about mission and tithe. The Lord met our needs when we sat down and decided as husband and wife to give our first fruits to him, he said. He didn't only meet our needs, but he also met the needs of the missionary in Africa. The SUV became a blessing that kept on giving year after year after year. You have been listening to a reading of the Adult Sabbath School Bible Study Guide by Dr. Percy Harold from Queensland, Australia. This service is brought to you by Hope Channel, the Sabbath School Department, and Christian Services for the Blind. Remember, God is always faithful.